This is the Facts of Life, where research-based knowledge from the Family and Consumer Sciences is brought to you with life applications. I'm your host, Amanda Harner.
And I'm Hope Smith, a family and consumer science educator and the graphic guru of the pod.
My guest today is infant and maternal nutrition expert, Dr. Sina Gallo. And these are the facts on infant and maternal nutrition, Part 1. Today's show is the first segment of a two-part show. I will be interviewing two guests, Dr. Sina Gallo and Dr. Kojo Anderson. Both are faculty members of the Department of Nutritional Sciences at the University of Georgia, and both are experts in the field of maternal and infant nutrition. Now, before you totally check out on me, if you don't have kids or never plan to, let me make a quick case for why you should care about this topic. First and foremost, you were once a child. This episode could shed some light on your current nutrition habits and attitudes towards food. Second, if you plan to have children in the future, you should be aware that you can make choices today that will benefit them later. Yes, even if those kids don't exist yet, you can make choices today that could benefit them later. Third, if you plan to be a leader in your community, this is an important topic. Many of the chronic diseases and health conditions that we deal with as Americans, at a minimum, they can be managed through good nutrition, and at best, they can be avoided completely through good nutrition. This is the case throughout the lifespan, which includes during formation in the womb. As Americans, our chronic diseases cost us a lot of money. According to the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, heart disease, which is the leading cause of death in the United States, and stroke cost our healthcare system $216 billion per year and another $147 billion in lost productivity on the job. Diabetes costs are also in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, I'm not saying nutritional interventions are the only solution. However, solutions that affect habit change and access to good nutrition for our communities will alleviate both economic as well as social burdens for those communities. We know that poor diet is one of the leading risk factors for cardiometabolic disease. In fact, a 2019 study found that 18.2% of all ischemic heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes could be attributed to suboptimal diet. This means even if you have a genetic risk for these diseases, you can still have a profound impact on this risk through good diet. And guess what? It starts when you're a kid. Today I have with me Dr. Sina Gallo, and she comes to us actually from the University of Georgia, originally from Canada. And she has her bachelor's in science in dietetics, her master's of science in human nutrition, and her PhD in human nutrition. And she does a lot of her research around the area of maternal and infant nutrition. At the University of Georgia, she teaches classes like lifespan nutrition, nutritional assessment, research methods, and she also teaches micronutrients and food nutrition policy. Welcome, Dr. Gallo.
So thanks, Amanda. Thanks for inviting me. This is a great opportunity. I'm a registered dietitian, and I was trained in nutritional sciences. And my area of research is in maternal and infant nutrition. I'm interested in the early periods of life and how nutrition during this time can prevent chronic diseases later in life. I work mostly with vulnerable populations, those that are participating in federal food assistance programs like WIC, as well as with racial and ethnic minorities. We've done quite a bit of work when I was in my previous institution in Virginia with Latino families in that area.
Nice. So what attracted you to this particular area of maternal and infant nutrition?
So I guess my light bulb moment was probably when I was a student myself. Probably when I was an undergraduate student in dietetics, I learned about David Barker and the Barker hypothesis. So Dr. Barker was an epidemiologist. So he studied population groups and disease among populations in London. And he noticed that those men actually in London that were dying of heart disease were also those men who were born at a low birth weight. And so he he's the first to actually identify this relationship. And at first it was very controversial. How can, what happens during, even before development, which affects birth weight, actually lead to chronic disease. But now we refer to his hypothesis as the fetal origins of adult disease. And when I learned about this, it was fascinating to me, because what happens even before we are born may actually affect this long-term health. And he actually hypothesized that there's adaptations that are made during fetal development, so during pregnancy, that may actually pre-program us to chronic diseases like heart disease or diabetes later in life. So when I learned about this, it was, I guess, my, really sparked my interest in particularly in the importance of pregnancy and early childhood in prevention and of disease.
Very interesting. So before we get too far into our interview, I like to include a few things so that viewers can get to know you a little bit better. And I was just wondering if you could go back and share anything about your work with your 18-year-old self. What would it be and why?
That's a really good question. I think there is so much I've learned since I was 18 years old. And I think that, though I don't know if I would actually tell myself anything at that time. I think every challenge or obstacle that I had to overcome, I learned something. And so that would change my trajectory. It might not have brought me here to, the University of Georgia. And so I think that's, part of the process and actually overcoming those challenges yourself and developing those skills to deal with that is probably, kind of what made me who I am now. So I don't think I would actually tell them anything.
I appreciate that, because I think there is something about working through challenges that can be very beneficial to our development as humans. And I think it gives us a lot to offer other people too. So I appreciate that you actually would not tell your younger self anything different, because you realize that there's a benefit to working through some things, and
I'd probably scare them off from doing it. It's been a journey.
Yeah. Let's dive in a little bit more to the research, what the research shows regarding health throughout the lifespan, which is the subject that you teach on. And a lot of research has gone into how mothers or mother-to-be's health is associated with the health outcomes of her children. And there's even some research starting to look back at how grandparents' nutrition and the health that was produced from those nutritional habits plays into the role of their descendants. So can you speak a little bit to what we've learned so far that the public should be aware of?
So I think our understanding has changed over the last few decades, and actually that's not a long time in nutrition or in science. A few decades we've learned about the importance of that 0 to 24 months of age, so pregnancy and up to very early life, how different nutrition or how nutritional factors can actually be critical in development. So we've learned a lot about that. I actually did some work during my master's training. So I did all of my training, in Montreal at McGill University, and my master's work was actually working with gestational diabetic moms. We actually looked at their offspring, so the daughters of those who had gestational diabetes during their pregnancy, and compared them to women who did not have gestational diabetes. And we actually found that the daughters, as early as even, I think they were 11 years old, so adolescents, actually had risk factors at that age already. And so we know that gestational diabetes, if your grandmother had gestational diabetes, your mom is more likely to have it, and so is, and now, the daughter. And so that's where we're really interested in how can we identify, these risk factors early on and prevent the development of gestational diabetes. So I think that's a good example of, kind of how important that period, like our grandparents or moms are to our own health, and really our understanding of kind of that early period of life, how important, critically important it is for later. We also know now, the importance of nutrients, and that's actually where I'm working on right now is in with vitamins. But folic acid, back in the 90s, we didn't know how important folic acid was for women, especially women of reproductive age or those who are pregnant, actually need a sufficient amount of folic acid early in their pregnancy. So this is even within the first month, even before they know they're pregnant. They need sufficient amounts of folic acid, which can't only come from diet. Sometimes it needs to come from supplemental sources. But that is really critical for prevention of neural tube defects in the babies. And so we know that now, and that's only a few decades, ago that we figured that out. And now most women are actually, or who are, thinking of getting pregnant, are on taking a prenatal supplement that includes that. So I think that we're learning, it's still a new area, understanding this. And actually the work that I'm doing right now is looking at vitamin D requirements for pregnant women. In order for insufficient amount of vitamin D, if you're not getting enough vitamin D, it can lead to bone diseases. So if a mother doesn't get enough vitamin D during her pregnancy, or her status is low and deficient, she can actually, the baby might be at risk for vitamin D deficiency and possibly bone health effects, as well as other health outcomes. So we're looking at how much vitamin D is necessary during this pregnancy period to optimize infant health.
Right. So can you explain a little bit about how vitamin D is different from other vitamins?
Sure. So vitamin D, I think it's a pretty cool vitamin because it's also a hormone. And so you need it to get it through dietary sources, actually through diet or supplemental sources. For most of us, we likely won't be able to get enough vitamin D just from diet alone. And so that's why supplementation is necessary. And it acts in the body. It needs to be activated through different steps. So first in your kidney and your liver, and then to its active form, and that's the form that actually acts on bone and may have benefits for other organs or for other prevention of other diseases. So it is an important, pretty cool nutrient because it actually has these hormonal effects as well.
Very interesting. So this may be a little outside, but when you say things like that, it makes me start to wonder. So in situations where there might be like type 2 diabetes or gestational diabetes or other things related to our metabolic health, does that affect our ability to absorb vitamin D appropriately?
So that's where vitamin D research is really complicated
Okay.
because we all we all will absorb vitamin D differently. And this is based on a number of different factors. So if, for example, where you live, if you live in higher latitudes, like in Montreal, where I come from, you don't get as much sunshine as you get here in Georgia. There may also, if you are in a sunny place, you may be putting sunscreen and so on, or your skin pigmentation, the color, darker skin pigmentation allows less endogenous endogenous production of vitamin D. So actually, that's an important component. I actually forgot to mention this part, is that vitamin D can actually be made through a sun exposure. And so you can actually make vitamin D by going out in the sun and being exposed to at least probably a few minutes, depending on your skin type and skin color, to make vitamin D endogenously through that. So that's another source of vitamin D. But it's complicated because we are all going to have different ability to produce it endogenously. And so that will affect our levels in our blood.
So a big topic, as you know, in nutrition, we talk a lot when it comes to the 0 to 2 years old about breastfeeding. And breastfeeding can be a very divisive subject for people. And we know that the American Pediatrics Association recommends breastfeeding and stuff, but one of the things that we see in the field of nutrition is sometimes women are not breastfeeding, or they're not breastfeeding as long as maybe would be ideal or most beneficial. Can you speak a little bit to why breastfeeding matters?
Sure. So breastfeeding, I guess is what is nutritionally the composition of breast milk is what babies actually would need. And so it's a perfectly suited or made really for babies. And actually infant formula companies have tried to replicate, and they've done a really good job. There are some things like antibodies that the mother produces in the breast milk that just cannot be replicated in some of the infant formulas, even the really expensive one. So that I think there is still kind of that, although infant formula is an alternative, and it is, going to be used by majority of U.S. Women for their infants for a number of different reasons. But breastfeeding also creates this bond with the mom, and that's not the same as you get from bottle feeding. And so there's lots of benefits. In addition, it's just free. So economically, that you can't compete with infant formula. So I think there's lots of benefits to breastfeeding. But, you're right. The majority of women in the United States are going to, move to formula feed their infant over the course of that first year of life. And so safe alternatives are necessary, and that's where infant formula comes in. So I think this is a choice. It's not just between the mother and the infant. It's the family needs to make this decision, but it's also there's alternatives that are available. But educating women and dads about preparing or how to prepare infant formula is something I think that gets lost. We've kind of we always recommend, you should breastfeed, and these are the benefits of breastfeeding. But I think we need to also support women and that choose not to breastfeed, and give them education about how to safely prepare infant formula to their infant, especially when they're really young, like less than 3 months. It's important to make sure that it is prepared safely. So I think there is education needed there too.
I like that you brought that point up, and I think it's an important point, because no matter how you think about this issue with breastfeeding, the reality is that there are situations where it's just not possible. And so, let's just throw out the situation of a dad who does not have a partner who can produce milk. And so, that's a situation that you're going to have to use formula. But I think you hit on something that is really important, and that is that it is important for people to be educated on how to prepare it properly.
Yeah, there's been a lot in the news lately with the infant formula shortage and the because of the bacteria that was found in one of the manufacturing plants. So I do think that infant formula is fairly safe. In the United States, it's produced under very specific, requirements at these plants. So I think it's once you get home, though, that's and open up the formula, especially powdered formula. So there's different types of formula that are available. Ready to feed formula is liquid and it's prepared, so you can just give it directly to the baby. That's much more expensive. It's not covered by some food assistance programs like WIC. So powdered formula is actually what's mostly consumed. And so when you prepare the formula, you need to mix it with water. The water needs to be sterile, so it needs to be boiled and then needs to be cooled off to a safe temperature before it's fed to the infant. Most people prepare it in batches, so it needs to actually be stored in the fridge and then heated. And so all of those steps can introduce formula. I don't think we're actually doing much research on that part of it, and I think the risk is low, for contamination, but there is a risk, and I think
probably a higher risk in certain countries, more so than in the U.S. But yeah, still.
Oh yeah, I think if you have running water and you have, in the United, most homes have access to, running water, and that is a lot more complicated when you don't. So I think that's something, that we have, many of us here in the United States have benefit.
Yeah. So how do fathers fit into the research?
Oh, good question. So actually, we just are hoping to publish a paper on this right now. We actually worked with the WIC, national WIC sample, and looked at sources of encouragement for breastfeeding. And we found that the more sources of encouragement a mother has to breastfeed, the more likely she will breastfeed, and not just breastfeed, initiate breastfeeding, start breastfeeding, but also more likely to exclusively breastfeed. So that means no other foods other than breast milk, and also more likely to increase the duration of breastfeeding. So how long she breastfeeds for. And so fathers play a really important role in that. They're supportive, of breastfeeding. So the mother needs to breastfeed the infant, but there are also other options, like the mom can pump her breast milk, and the dads or other, support can help to feed the baby, to give the moms a break. But so having sources of encouragement, including dads, is really critically important. And that's what our study found.
Nice. Yeah. And do you know, I am probably like throwing this one out here because I didn't give you a heads up on this. Is there any research around beyond fathers and mothers and mother-in-laws and that kind of thing? Is there any research around how we act as a community as a whole that can either support or hinder a mother from continuing forward with breastfeeding? I mean, I know that there's a lot of policy and advocacy around the workplace. And some of that is community related and how we perceive breastfeeding as a community. But one of the things that obviously our listening group includes people who are having a family, and hopefully people who of all different kinds, some of which may not want to have children of their own. But I want to make sure that we try to find places where this conversation helps them to see the importance of it too, and where they fit into the conversation.
Oh, I think there's different levels of, information that we get. So our policies, for example, these are federal policies, or state policies can actually help to protect breastfeeding, like maternity leave, or actually, protecting active breastfeeding in public. I think that's a big one that came out a couple years ago, that people have the right to breastfeed in public spaces in states, and so a lot of people don't realize that having sufficient time to pump milk during the work time. So many women have to go back to work really quickly in the United States, so they don't get much time off. But there are protections where you can actually have time, or should have time, to pump milk so that you can feed that to your to the baby. So these are, large scale, kind of federal, state level, but the community is also really important. I actually remember, I think one of the things that I learned was about normalizing breastfeeding. And I think there was this campaign where you actually had breastfeeding cutouts of women who were breastfeeding, and they were posted in in the city, like outside the court, the library, or inside the library, and just to normalize seeing a woman breastfeed her baby. Yeah, so I think that that's one of the initiatives that could help, to normalize breastfeeding. But also, now I think the last couple of years, social media has become so important in informing us, and actually that's also a source where people go to for information, if they don't know the answer. So that's those social media communities, and I don't think we know that much about this because it's so new, but they play a role too in helping individuals make decisions. And so I think that we don't know very much about at all, and I think that's interesting, but I'm sure they play a role.
Yeah, no, I like that's a really good point, because from other studies that aren't necessarily related to this topic, we do know that social media has had a profound impact on people's behaviors and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you. So one of your other areas of research focuses on improving access for proper nutrition before, during, and after a child is born. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Oh, sure. So this is a newer area for me. So so I know you may have heard about that. Having access to healthcare, improves your health outcomes, and so this is true even during pregnancy. If a woman is able to have a shorter distance to go see her gynecologist or obstetrician during her pregnancy, she'll have better health pregnancy outcomes. We also know this is true for nutrition. So women who get better nutrition or have access to food assistance programs like WIC are more likely to have babies who are lower birth weight and that are healthier. And so having that access to these services is critical. And one of the things that I was interested in was one of the main reason why women stop breastfeeding is perceived insufficient milk supply. So it's the belief that they don't produce enough breast milk. And this is likely untrue, and actually getting enough. So babies really need a tiny amount of breast milk, especially early on. And so we often think, oh, it's not, we can't measure in ounces and so it's hard to know if the baby's getting enough. And so main reason why women stop breastfeeding is because they think they're not getting enough. But getting proper education from lactation specialists, such as IBCLCs, these are International Board Certified Lactation Counselors, or CLCs, another trained professional who can help to assist mothers with getting, proper positioning and dealing with issues related to breastfeeding. Access to those specialists, or also WIC has what's called a peer counselor program. These are women who breastfed, who also then provide support to others. And getting access to those services, the research suggests that you actually are more likely to continue to breastfeed. And so we looked at this in Georgia. We actually found, and we just started to explore this, but areas that have highest social vulnerability index, this is an indicator that puts into it information about income and neighborhood safety and housing. In the areas in Georgia that have kind of this lowest social vulnerability, the highest social vulnerability, are going to be those that have less access to these specialists, these lactation specialists. And so one of the things that we're interested in is, how do we improve the number of individuals who are trained to get into those areas that are also the ones that are less likely to breastfeed. So that's one of the areas that we're interested in, kind of newer area, looking at access to lactation support services.
So we've been talking about how there's all these influences that can affect choices for breastfeeding, but if a young woman who has not had her child yet, but she's pregnant, she's been told by her pediatrician, you should consider breastfeeding, and these are the reasons why, and it's good for the baby's health, and it's more economical, et cetera, et cetera. And what steps can she take to educate herself and be more prepared ahead of time, with the idea that sometimes when after the baby is born, people don't realize that they're going to be having some of the struggles that they have with breastfeeding, and it becomes discouraging amongst the other voices that speak into the decision. So for the mom who knows she wants to breastfeed and she knows she's already going to have some, maybe some people in her family and some people in her community who are going to be like, I'm not totally supportive of this, but she, as the mom, is like, I want this to happen. What can she do to prepare herself ahead of time, for the other unexpected things that kind of come up with breastfeeding that are challenging?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because I think there's, of course, she's already decided she wants to breastfeed, that's the first step. And I think, having individuals that are support, so her support system around, I think are probably what's going to help her, because in the middle of the night when she's, having trouble with the baby latching on, she needs someone to call or to ask, how do I get through this? And I think that's the point that kind of many of women fall in, is when you don't have that support around you. So I think that's where I think that peer counselor program is a great program, is because that links you up with women who have breastfed, and so they're can provide support for. It's not just about positioning, or it's also just listening, and I think that's kind of really play a big part, is having someone that can listen to your struggles and really be supportive. I think that's really key, and maybe outlining who those people can be, or the go-to people, is probably going to be best, because they've already if they've already decided they're going to breastfeed, that's the first step. That's the hardest, kind of one of the toughest
step, right?
The hardest step, making that decision. And I think that's probably the support system is going to be really key.
Yeah. So like identifying if and you've already made that decision, finding those and identifying the peer counselors in your area before you actually have the baby can potentially be very helpful, and already starting to form that relationship and know who you can go to and call.
Yeah, I think that's key, because when in the middle, when it's late at night and you're really struggling and you can't, you don't have anyone in your home, you need that person to talk with. So identifying them, maybe people in your family, maybe friends, but yeah, there is these supports, and that's where the IBCLCs or CLCs, these lactation specialists, but also peer counselors can come in
and be very helpful. Yeah, and sometimes hospitals kind of help you identify and find those people. So sometimes you can ask your hospital if they know and can point you in those directions, even if they don't actively tell you. They should most of the time be able to kind of help you find those sources too. So we've discussed a lot of different things. And I feel like we kind of just talked a little bit about a takeaway, but what other maybe 2 specific applications that we can give to the listeners related to maternal and infant health that you would encourage people to make steps on, or just something specific that they can apply with what we know the research says?
So I think it's the first is probably if a woman is thinking of getting pregnant or is pregnant, knowing that there's that's such a nutritional is really key. And we often say, oh, you're eating for two, and you're actually, and this is what I tell my students in my lifespan class, you're actually not eating for two, and it's much less about quantity than about quality of the nutrients that you're getting during that time. So making sure you're getting those nutrient dense foods that contain lots of sources of calcium and iron and folic acid, or getting a supplementation through a prenatal supplement or vitamin D supplementation. I think that's key. So making sure that your diet is healthy from the start, and not just eating double. I think that if it's not nutrient dense, it's probably not going to be really helpful for the developing fetus. The other point I think we talked about is probably access to health. And I think there's, one of the programs we talked about was the WIC program. So this is a federal food assistance program. It provides, if you're pregnant, if you're postpartum, after birth, provides nutrition education. It also provides services for those infants as up to age 5. So it's quite a wide, span of time. And you can get not just nutrition education, but vouchers to purchase food. It helps to support, supplement the food. It also provides referrals to other healthcare professionals. And so WIC, though, unlike other federal food assistance programs, the income eligibility is much lower. And so you don't actually, or it's less conservative, I would say, than other programs. And so you may actually not even know that you're eligible for this program, and because you actually, may fit into the income eligibility criteria. So I think getting access to services like WIC, and we know that WIC, provides these food vouchers, but also can really help to provide a support. They're in the communities, they're throughout the United States, in different counties. And we also know that about 50% of those who are actually eligible for WIC don't actually participate in WIC. And so there's lots of people that are not participating for different reasons. So if you're pregnant, and that's one case, but if you know someone who may be pregnant, or may have a young child that may help to be that this may supplement or help supplement their nutrition, referrals to programs like WIC can make a real difference in their lives. So education about that, I think, is also important.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel like that's a really good point. That WIC both offers education, so they can be a great resource to go to, even in regard to breastfeeding, and also other questions related to what nutrition you need as a mother, but also what nutrition your child needs. And then I also like your point that it is not by accident that WIC is supposed to capture a broader economic bracket than some of the other programs. And that is partly because it is very important for us as a country and as a state to support maternal and infant nutrition in a way that helps to alleviate health burdens later on in life. So that's one of the reasons that it is more broadly offered, in the sense that you can qualify much sooner with a little higher of an income than sometimes people would expect. So if you are not pregnant, keep that in mind. But even if you have children who are under kindergarten age, and you're struggling, it might be worthwhile to seek out the WIC program in your area and see if you can't benefit from it in one way or another. So
And WIC's been around since the 60s. Actually, interesting fact, it's based on a model from the Montreal Diet Dispensary, which is actually where I'm
Oh,
from. So it was actually taken from a successful program there and kind of made nation much larger, nation of across the United States. But the program itself has been, politicians keep supporting it because it has been found to be successful. It actually does help to improve the mother's, status during her pregnancy, but also the babies and children, improves their health outcomes as well. So it works, and so that's why I think it's continuously renewed and supported through our government.
yeah. Dr. Gallo, do you have anything else that you would like to add today?
I think maybe one of the things that I didn't mention before is I think we were talking about access, and I think we talked about geographic access, and so having a service, it could be a medical doctor, having a dietitian or nutrition service close by, or lactation support services. I think that's really important, is being able to access these services in a geographic location. But also, I think we didn't talk about is the services that are actually appropriate, not in appropriate language. So like speaking the same language, but also with individuals who actually understand their culture and your norms of that population that they're serving. I think that's key. So access is not just, geographic area, but also, includes access to services in their language, by individuals who understand kind of the culture and norms of that target population.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that on a level too of not just maybe an immigrant to this country who needs a cultural adjustment to how they're being given and receiving information, but it could also be subcultures within our population too that need there to be access in a way that they can understand and relate to it, or where they sometimes it's a safety issue, like that they feel safe and free to discuss and enter into a space to be able to get the help that they might need and that their children might need. So I like that you brought that up. So, well, thank you so much for your time today. And, I really appreciate it. And
oh, well, thank you so much for, having me and inviting me to talk with you. Yeah, this was great.
Yeah,
thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Research-based resources referenced in and related to this episode of Facts of Life podcast can be found in the episode notes and description.
The views and thoughts expressed in this video podcast are the speaker's own and do not necessarily represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of the University of Georgia or the guest organizations and/or employers. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes only. The University of Georgia name, as well as those of guest organizations, and all forms and abbreviations are the property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. These are the facts of life. Thanks for joining us. Check out our website at monroefacs.extension.uga.edu. That's Monroe, FACS, extension.uga.edu.